out on a cloudy Victoria day. Thanks for joining us. There was a significant announcement this morning from the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta, and I'm happy for the opportunity to join you to respond to that agreement. First of all, I'd like to start with where British Columbia is at right now in terms of our efforts to build the national economy, to create jobs and prosperity for Canadians and for British Columbians. We have huge projects, really exciting projects in our province right now that will employ thousands of people, create billions of dollars in revenue for the federal and provincial governments to help pay for the public services that people need, and that are done in a way that is environmentally responsible and that is done in partnership with First Nations. This approach, which we have been working on for years, is why we are leading the country in major projects in the Federal Major Projects Office. We have 4 times more projects than any other province in Canada. These are private sector projects with billions of dollars of investment in Canada that will increase the buying power of Canadians who are struggling with affordability, that will employ thousands of people from across the country in good-paying jobs supporting families, and that will do so reducing our reliance on the United States. These projects involve exports to global markets across the Pacific. We're really proud of that, and the core of this work, the foundation of it, is the support of British Columbians, Canadians, and particularly First Nations to be able to work together to lift the whole country up. With the announcement today from the federal government and from the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta, my anxiety about the pipeline proposal that has come from Alberta, that is a key part of this agreement, is that it runs the very significant risk that has already partially been realized of taking our eye off the prize, of distracting the federal government, distracting resources, and pulling time away from real projects that can be delivered in the near term. And just one example, we have the largest private sector investment in Canadian history that will reach final investment decision in the next year, the LNG Canada Phase 2 project. We need the federal government focused on that. We need them focused on the $50 billion in mining projects in the Northwest enabled by the North Coast Transmission Line. These are projects that are imminently getting their permits or already have all relevant approvals. They have private sector backers, and they are ready to go. The reason why I'm anxious about this proposed pipeline project from Alberta being a distraction is that we've already seen that happen. Nutrien, a large potash producer from Saskatchewan, was involved in conversations with the federal government, with the government of Saskatchewan, about where to export their potash from, a project that would result in significant jobs in British Columbia, would secure the people of Saskatchewan's access to global markets if it stayed in Canada, and would also reduce the risk of Donald Trump putting tariffs on Canadian potash going through the United States. They were making a decision about which port to export through. Unfortunately, instead of having conversations with British Columbia about this project, the Premier of Saskatchewan says he was engaged with Premier Smith about this pipeline project proposal. Because of that, in my opinion, Nutrien made the decision to ship out of Washington State instead of out of British Columbia. Premier Moe and I should have been working together on addressing bottlenecks by encouraging the federal government to invest in new rail infrastructure, the Massey Tunnel, bottlenecks to our ports that Nutrien cited as one of the reasons why they decided to go to Washington State. So my concern about this project being a distraction to real projects and real opportunities for Canadians, unfortunately, I've seen that happen once already, and I don't want to see it happen again. The pipeline proposal has no project proponent. There is not one private company that has stepped up to say, if you build it, we'll buy it. If the approvals are in place, we'll build it. Not one. It has no route. Currently, taxpayers, through the Trans Mountain Pipeline Corporation, are funding the development of the route. Not only does it not have permits, it doesn't even have a route. But the third thing it doesn't have is something that the Prime Minister said he believed was core in the House, in the federal Parliament just recently, that First Nations agree and support projects before they will go forward through the Major Projects Office. And this project does not have the support of coastal First Nations. And that's important to us in BC because all of the projects that I outlined to you, those billions of dollars of investment, those thousands of jobs, depend as well on the support of coastal First Nations, whose support we do have for these projects. There are significant additional components to this agreement that British Columbia will need to take some time to study and understand. There is a marked departure in federal government policy around oil and gas cap, emissions cap, around clean electricity regulations and other pieces that we'll have to study to understand. But the bottom line for us is that we need to make sure that this project doesn't become an energy vampire with all of the variables that have yet to be fulfilled. No proponent, no route, no money, no First Nation support, that it cannot draw limited federal resources, limited Indigenous governance resources, limited provincial resources away from the real projects that will employ people, provide the country with money that we desperately need, and provide investment and access to global markets to deepen our trade relationships overseas. So I will continue to advocate for British Columbia's interests, which I believe are also Canadian interests, in delivering as many projects as we can, as quickly as possible, to grow our economy and support people across the country. I'm proud of the fact that BC is the economic engine of the new economy that we're building together as Canadians, and we will continue to play our role. And all I ask is that every project across the country be evaluated against the same criteria. Do you have permits? Do you have a private project proponent? How much money is it going to bring in? How much are you going to raise wages and GDP for Canadians? And on those criteria, BC, far and away, leads the country. We will continue to do so, and we're proud to do so. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today at the Legislature in Victoria. We're going to take questions from the media now. All members of the media will have one question and one follow-up. And today we're going to start with Keith Baldry from Global News.
Hi, Premier. Is today a day of embarrassment for British Columbia, given that two other governments meeting in secret, concocting a scheme to implement something in this province that this government is on record as being vehemently against? And what does that say about BC's place in Confederation?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I'm incredibly proud of what our province is doing for not just British Columbians, but for Canadians in lifting our gross domestic product, in creating revenues that are going to support all Canadians through the public services that they deserve, leading the country in this work. I understand the need for the Prime Minister to engage with premiers, to reach agreements with them, and I don't fault him for engaging with Alberta on this. It would have been good for BC to be at the table. There's no question about it. Had BC been at the table, the agreement wouldn't have omitted basic things like, are we going to do anything about spill response? Or we would have canvassed potential win-win scenarios of asking, if we're going to start from scratch on a new project for the country, why aren't we talking about refining capacity? Why aren't we talking about using Alberta's oil and gas to ensure that Canada is independent of any oil and gas imports, that we only use Canadian oil and gas? In British Columbia, our philosophy is for our resources, we're trying to get as many jobs as possible out of those resources before they go to global markets. We too often sell our resources wholesale and buy them back retail. And that would have been one of the conversations I would have raised at the table. Why is British Columbia importing oil and gas from the United States? Why is Ontario doing that? When we have these resources here, could we increase refining capacity and have a win for everybody here? I think there are wins for everybody, but that can't happen if we're not all at the table together.
And Keith, do you have a follow-up?
Yes. So, as you say, there's no proponent, there's no plan, there's no route, really nothing there. Today, the Prime Minister said if there's no proponent, there's no pipeline, period, full stop. Do you interpret that to mean that there's not going to be any federal subsidy, as we saw with the TMX pipeline, and therefore the odds of this pipeline being built are rather remote?
I think this proposal has some major challenges. First of all, we already have a publicly owned pipeline. It is not a capacity. It is for sale. Nobody wants to buy it. For this new pipeline proposal, it similarly has no company that has stepped up and said, even under the most optimistic conditions, that they would be interested in building it, that if it were already built, that they would be interested in buying it, which leaves only one possible way that it could get built, which is through a massive taxpayer-funded support in the order of $30 to $40 billion of taxpayer dollars to get it built. Now, in that scenario, I think British Columbia has some projects that could compete with this one that would create just as much opportunity and be significantly cheaper to taxpayers. But we're not even asking for taxpayer dollars. I don't think one taxpayer dollar should go into this project, and I'm glad to see in the agreement that that is a condition. And I think that that is probably fatal to Premier Smith's proposal. I understand the Prime Minister was speaking to the Calgary Board of Trade and jokingly asked if anyone wanted to be a proponent of the project. Joking aside, there is no proponent. There is unlikely to be a proponent. And so even if there were a proponent, one of the key hurdles of coastal First Nations support has not been achieved. And it has been their position since 1977 that the oil tanker ban needs to be in place, because if there were an oil spill, their way of life would end, as would $1.7 billion in economic activity on the coast.
Thanks, Premier. Next, we'll head to Katie DeRosa, CBC.
Premier, have you talked to the Prime Minister since that initial phone call on Monday when, just hours later after he told you it was not finalized, we found out the broad strokes were finalized? So can you explain how you feel about being left out in the dark when you talked to him on Monday? And so what has been the conversation since then?
Yes, I spoke with the Prime Minister yesterday. He outlined for me the broad pieces of the agreement so that I was aware of it. I had asked him in our previous call to underline the importance of First Nations support for this project and British Columbia's support for this project as conditions of the project approval. He stood in the House the next day and made it clear that that was his position. He said this project and projects generally through the Major Projects Office should not proceed without the agreement and support of First Nations. So I'm glad that he listened carefully during our conversation. I'm glad that's his position. And I will happily, and at the request of Coastal First Nations, invite the Prime Minister to take the next obvious step, which is to sit down with Coastal First Nations and talk with them about his proposal that he's advancing with Alberta.
And follow-up, Katie?
John Rustad said earlier today that either you're on Team Canada or you're on Team Trump, alluding to the fact that this would allow Canada to continue to sell its oil to U.S. markets at a discount. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I continue to be surprised that we're not having a conversation about selling our oil to Canadians, that we're not talking about adding refinery capacity. I think that's an important conversation that we could be having, and unfortunately we're not having. But I will say for the Conservatives in British Columbia, when Trump started attacking our economy, their first instinct was to stand with Trump. When now fictional, non-existent, unfunded project from Alberta threatens First Nation support for thousands of jobs and prosperity for families in British Columbia and for Canada, Mr. Rustad is standing with Alberta. What will it take for the Conservatives to stand with British Columbians? What will it take for him to support actual projects here in this province that will lift up everybody across the country? I don't understand his strategy, but I can say for my part, for my colleagues behind me, we're going to stand up for British Columbians and for Canadians, for real projects that will be delivered, and I am really excited about what we're doing here and what it will create for this country.
Next, we'll head to Rob Buffum from CTV.
Well, hi, Premier. Danielle Smith said today that BC does not have a veto on this pipeline going ahead when she was asked about what role BC could play in this. I want to get your reaction to that. And she also said that she spoke to you last night. I'm curious if you could, give us the gist of what your message to her was regarding BC's position on this pipeline.
Yeah, thanks. I think the proposed project from Premier Smith faces some pretty major hurdles. She doesn't have a private company that has any interest in this. There's no private money at all that's come forward. I understand that's a condition of going forward. The First Nations, who the Prime Minister says their support and approval is needed in order for this project to go ahead, are adamantly opposed. And I encourage the Prime Minister to sit down with Coastal First Nations to canvass that. When I spoke to Premier Smith, I said very clearly, I'm always happy to sit down with you to explain our position on this proposal, to find areas where British Columbia and Alberta can cooperate. But I will always defend BC's interests, and defending BC's interests includes defending the oil tanker ban that has been there through multiple generations of politicians and political parties for good reason. An oil tanker spill would decimate a way of life for people in the northwest of our province. And there's a whole bunch of other things that we could work on together that would lift up people in Alberta and in BC, and I'm glad to engage on that.
And follow-up, Rob?
Yeah, I just wanted to get your reaction. You must have watched some of the things today, seeing the Prime Minister and Premier Smith signing that MOU, almost giddy, big smiles on their faces. What are your thoughts when you watch that and know that you haven't even been consulted, and Coastal First Nations say they have not at all been consulted? And as a addendum, I guess I'm wondering, is there any world in which this government, the NDP government here in BC, ultimately does agree to a pipeline and a tanker ban being lifted?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think for the Prime Minister, I understand he's got to work with provinces. He's got to come to agreements. I think that continued friction and antagonism between Ottawa and Alberta is not helpful. And I'm glad that they were able to sit down and do that work. The part where I'm challenged and where I really have to draw the line is that there are limited federal resources, whether it's money or time or bureaucrats to work on things. And we have one goal, in my opinion, in this country, and that should be to diversify our markets, to get real projects delivered that are going to employ people, that are going to give them good paying jobs, going to raise the GDP, going to grow the economy, going to help us pay for public services, and all of those other good things. And if you apply that lens to this pipeline project, it is not even in the top 20. There is no project proponent, there is no route, there is no First Nation support for it. It will not employ anybody because it does not exist. And yet, it's coming at the expense of very real projects in British Columbia that I am standing up for, and I will deliver, and the team behind me is going to deliver for British Columbians and for all Canadians.